From the Oklahoman newsroom, it's time for Thunder Thursday. I'm Jenny Carlson here with our entire Thunder coverage team, columnist Barry Trammell, Thunder beat writers Eric Horn, Brett Dawson, and guys, it has begun. Russell Westbrook, Paul George, playing paintball, and what does it mean, everybody? What does it mean? Anything? Barry?
Paintball P. Paintball P. Yes. It's a natural.
Yes.
Okay, does it actually mean anything, though, guys? I mean, are we going to chalk this up to, you know, any insider dealings here as Paul George's, clearly his free agency is in question in the offseason? Brett, what do you think?
Well, I got two takeaways. One, it can't be totally meaningless. These two guys are hanging out away from basketball. They're hanging out in Los Angeles. They have forged kind of a relationship, and this is some proof of it. I don't know how many guys, you guys have been around here longer than I have. I don't know how many guys we've seen Westbrook doing this with in the offseason, really spending time together. Obviously, we're in an age where they can publicize it a little bit more and put it out there on Instagram. But that's one takeaway, I think. They are spending time together. That's a better sign than not, I think, for the Thunder. The second takeaway is they have awesome paintball courses, or whatever you call them, in Los Angeles, because that thing looked like a post-apocalyptic movie set. There were cars, like burned-out cars, and they were like in buses. It looked great.
Yeah. Eric, are you making anything of this?
Not really. But look, you can't. It's not a negative. It's definitely not a negative when two guys who had a turbulent year are still hanging out with each other. There's some similarities. We talked about this even before Paul George got to Oklahoma City. These are both LA guys. They both got young children. Both very family oriented. I think that's a good thing when it comes to Russell Westbrook and Paul George kind of forging a relationship. Russell Westbrook always talks about it. It's more important for him to have those relationships off the court with those guys like Paul George and Carmelo Anthony and some of his other teammates than it is for the actual on-court stuff. And, we tend to be skeptical about how these guys talk about basketball and what's important to them, but Russell Westbrook's typically a guy who means what he says. So it can't be a bad sign that these guys are having fun off the court.
Barry, we've never really known Russell Westbrook to be a guy that is sort of the Pied Piper of the off-court stuff. He's not a guy that you hear about, road trips. He's going out with guys, and maybe it happens, but you don't hear a ton about it. So in my mind, I don't know if it means Paul George is going to resign with the Thunder, but it's at least something to say, hey, listen, all this talk about Westbrook maybe not being a guy you can easily play with, maybe we need to temper that a little bit. Maybe some things are changing with Russell Westbrook.
Maybe they did change. Maybe the Durant defection had an effect on Russ, because you're right. We haven't seen Russell Westbrook as sort of the off-season quarterback, if you will, the guy that gets the gang together. That was never Russ's deal. And, we had a theory going that it wasn't so much that Durant didn't want to play with Russell anymore. Maybe he just didn't want to have to hang around the guy anymore because he can wear you out at times. So to me, it's a good sign when Paul George is saying, you know what, I hadn't really got enough of Russell Westbrook. I'll spend an afternoon shooting paint at him. It sounds good to me. So I take that as a good sign. What does it mean in the long term? Not very dang much, but it can't hurt.
Guys, I'm kind of wondering, as it relates to a big free agent move that Paul George is either going to make away or make to the Thunder. Obviously we saw how the Thunder dealt with the Kevin Durant free agent year. Didn't work out the way they wanted. Eric, do you think this might be maybe a sign of a shift in how the Thunder overall is going to try to approach, bringing Paul George back to maybe try to convince him to come back? Could this be part of that? Something we really didn't see with Durant.
Well, I think the shift signal was when Paul George got here to begin with, was when they had the big party at that place that's connected to
Jones Assembly.
Jones Assembly.
Come on, you're a cool kid. You're supposed to know this stuff.
I live on the north side. It's a little far. But I think we saw the shift there last summer with them, bringing in Paul George the way they did. I don't know if it's necessarily a shift in the Thunder's way of doing things, but it is different for Russell Westbrook. We know that for sure. He's not one to publicize him doing a bunch of crazy stuff with guys. He and George have had, the sit-down meeting last summer when he first got here to just kind of sit down and talk about that. Lee Jenkins has written about that at length, a great piece that he wrote last summer. So I'm sure there's going to be some other things coming out about these guys and their interactions over the summer and how that works. And, interesting thing to me is what role is Carmelo Anthony going to play in this, if any? Is he going to be a guy that the Thunder is going to utilize to be able to sit down with Paul, or have they strategically made it to where Carmelo Anthony isn't in the fold and it is a Russell Paul, Steven Adams thing going forward. It's going to be interesting to see if Carmelo Anthony plays any role in the next few weeks.
Well, Brett, what's the best guess on that? Because Sam Presti made it pretty clear Carmelo's going to have a different role if he's on this team next year, at least on the court. Is there a sense of what that might be looking like behind closed doors as it relates to Paul George's free agency?
Well, I think what Sam Presti actually made clear is he's going to have the same role that he had this year on the court. If he wants a different one, he needs to consider whether he wants to be here or not. Because what Carmelo kind of got at in his exit interview was wanting to play a little bit more the way he's played the first 14 years of his career, not so much the way he played the 15th. Thunder's not going to stand for that. The one thing that's kind of intriguing out of those exit interviews, when Sam Presti talked about the future of the Thunder, and some of this is just strictly age-related and contract-related, he talked about the idea of aligning Russell Westbrook, Paul George, and Steven Adams in the primes of their careers and how important that was to them. When Paul George talked about kind of sitting down and talking about the future, he talked about talking to Russell Westbrook. He didn't mention Carmelo Anthony. Some of that you can't read into what people say just in a setting like that, because they're not going to say they're not going to list every player who matters. It was interesting that in both those situations, Carmelo Anthony's name was out of that discussion, but that doesn't necessarily mean he won't be a part of this thing going forward. If Carmelo wants to come back, he's going to want Paul George to be here. If he's going to go elsewhere, then obviously I don't think the Thunder wants him to have too much input in what happens from here on out.
You know, guys, as we talk about this, obviously a lot of interrelated pieces as it relates to Paul George, and one of those things that does overlay with the Paul George situation is playoffs that are currently going on. Eric, from what you've seen thus far in the playoffs, teams exiting, teams surging, whatever, is there anything that's happened thus far that you think could play into Paul George's free agency?
One of the interesting situations is obviously what LeBron's going to do is going to dictate pretty much everything in free agency, because there aren't going to be that many teams with cap space. So wherever LeBron decides to go, whether it's Cleveland or whether it's going to LA or elsewhere, maybe even Philly, that's going to decide what teams do with their cap space and what they move on to next. I think that the way that Philly's going, it's a little intriguing how they've gone in this playoffs. They're clearly, not ready to go to that championship level, but they might be another piece missing. They're going to have some decisions to make in the summer. Do they want to upgrade that small forward position? They probably do. Robert Covington's a nice player, but he's not the offensive player there that you probably wanted from him in the playoffs. He's a good defender. Paul George would be an upgrade. LeBron James would obviously be an upgrade. It's an interesting thought that Philly could be a player for one of those two guys in the market. Or LA, of course, is always going to be an option. But Philly right now looks like they need that extra player to be able to battle with Boston. And if LeBron stays in Cleveland, be able to battle with LeBron as well.
And Brett, you're nodding at what Eric has to say. And you and I were talking a little bit about LeBron the other day in the office. And, it looks like if he is wanting to get over the Warriors hump, the best chance would be stay in the East, really build a juggernaut there. Is Philly the best option? I mean, is that sort of, as you've watched these playoffs evolve, is that where you potentially see a best landing spot for LeBron?
Well, it's interesting because it's curious how he fits exactly with Ben Simmons. They're LeBron is a much, much better player. Simmons plays a similar way. He's a big guy who's going to have the ball in his hands a lot, dynamic athlete, best surrounded by shooters. LeBron is also all of those things, and obviously a much older and much, much better player. From a basketball standpoint, Philly is intriguing too for Paul George. I think it's the most intriguing one for Paul George, just strictly from how does he plug into a basketball team and how much better does he make them. In LA, he's not any closer to a title than he is with Oklahoma City. I think there's some comfort in LA, there's some comfort in OKC, but if he wanted to step outside his comfort zone and look at a basketball fit, Philly's really interesting either for him or LeBron.
Barry, you had an interesting blog, I think it posted earlier Wednesday or maybe even Tuesday, about the Paul George, LeBron pieces and that moved at the trade deadline to open up the chance for the Lakers to possibly acquire both. And the way this is all played out with the Cavs in particular, those pieces that the Lakers shipped out, not really that important as it has shown here in the playoffs. It's been an interesting thing to see how those pieces have evolved on that Cavs roster during the playoffs.
Yeah, Cleveland remakes its roster in February, brings in 4 guys and throws them into the rotation. Rodney Hood from Utah, George Hill from Sacramento, and then Jordan Clarkson and Larry Nance Jr. from the Lakers. Turns out they played most of those guys, played all those guys in the rotation against Indiana and got out by the hair of their chinny chin chin. They get real serious and say, hey, George Hill, you play, the rest of you guys put your feet up. And they wipe out Toronto. So that trade was not that instrumental in helping these guys against the Raptors, but that trade really enhanced the Lakers' offseason. It gave the Lakers cap space to potentially go after 2 marquee free agents. One of those, of course, is going to be Paul George. Whether they get him or not, who knows? But the fact that they've got room for 2 makes their case a lot more substantial. So the Cavs did the Thunder no favors with that trade, and turns out maybe didn't even need that trade in the first place.
Yeah, the Cavs might have not done themselves any
Right.
favors with that whole thing. It's crazy to see how that's gone. Guys, we talked last week about the playoffs, where we thought things were headed. We've got a lot more clarity now. Obviously, finals pairings getting set. Biggest surprise. Anybody want to take a run at what the biggest surprise has been? Barry, you want to go first on this one?
Well, the Celtics are a huge surprise. For them to be able to compete the way they have without Irving, without Hayward, losing other guys periodically, Jaylen Brown for a little bit, Marcus Smart for a little bit, and to play the kind of basketball they've been playing is just phenomenal. It's a credit to Brad Stevens, it's a credit to their system, and it's a credit to their guys that I don't think get enough credit. Al Horford is a legitimately great player on both ends of the court, outplayed Joel Embiid in that Eastern semifinal. So Boston's been a big surprise to me, and nothing else really. I thought Sacramento. I thought Utah.
That would have been a surprise.
That would be a
Yeah,
surprise.
surprise.
But I thought Utah and New Orleans actually held up really well. 5-game series with Golden State and Houston, but they were all pretty competitive games. And even on Tuesday night when they were both about to go crater, Utah literally doesn't have any guards left.
Yeah.
Literally no guards, and they hang in there and take take Houston to the buzzer. New Orleans is dead in the water, down 26 in a closeout game, and come back and make Steve Kerr sweat in the last 2 minutes. So tip of the cap to Utah and to New Orleans.
Can I jump in and just say that people are talking about all that Boston's done without their 2 best players? Why is Al Horford not their best player? That guy is
he probably, you're right.
amazing.
He probably is their best player.
He's excellent. Brett?
He's been great.
Boston is the big surprise. I mean, I think to me, if I had to pick something beyond what the Celtics have done, because I expected the Sixers to win the series, Donovan Mitchell has surprised me in terms of just the collective body of work. Everybody's talked about how great he's been. He was okay for the most part against Houston. They did a really nice job with him defensively. He had a great game last night in the closeout game. He had a particularly great third quarter. If you take out that, he was shooting about 32% in the series. So he's had his struggles. But for a rookie to be so poised, to be so together, we've seen Ben Simmons, just what happens when you get playoff scouting and teams gearing up to stop you, how much he struggled. Mitchell has overcome a lot of that stuff. So I knew all year that those 2 were really good players. I've been surprised by how good Mitchell was in the postseason.
Eric, what do you got as biggest surprise?
My biggest surprise is the way that New Orleans just dominated Portland. That'll be my surprise, probably regardless of what happens, because I mean, all season we'd seen Portland handle the Thunder and handle them pretty easily. I mean, it wasn't a situation where the Thunder they didn't beat them. They didn't beat them in 4 games, and we thought Portland's a nightmare matchup for the Thunder. We saw the Thunder play some back and forth games against New Orleans. The last time we saw the Thunder play New Orleans, they didn't look very good at all. They were terrible. Nikola Mirotic made himself some money going into this playoffs. He played really well. Anthony Davis obviously a terror, and them just unlocking that system around Anthony Davis where he's the one big on the floor with Mirotic stretching the floor, and their guards playing the way that they did. Rondo, where'd he come from? New Orleans has really been the surprise of the postseason for me. Other than that, just kind of a low-key surprise is Chris Paul being healthy. I thought Chris Paul was going to break down at least once during these playoffs or at some point in time. The Rockets done a good job of managing his minutes with James Harden on and off the court, the stagger, and we've seen some beautiful Chris Paul basketball in this postseason. I mean, to have 41 points and no turnovers in a closeout game, it's been outstanding to watch Chris Paul, and I'm happy he's been able to get through a healthy postseason to finally get the matchup we want, Warriors and Rockets.
33 years old, Chris Paul going to his first conference finals, and we knew him when. He was a rookie here in Oklahoma City with the Hornets. It seems like forever ago, frankly. 13 years ago? 12 years ago? But good for him. He played a fantastic closeout quarter. Had, 20 in the fourth, Barry?
20 in the fourth. Scored 15 of their last 18. Made, 8 of 10 3-point shooting. He looked like Steph Curry out there, not Chris Paul.
Yeah.
So if he plays like Steph Curry, then, Houston's a load.
Hey, on the subject of point guards, Eric asked, where did Rajon Rondo come from? from the great city of Louisville, Kentucky. That's where.
Thanks
That was a long time ago.
Thanks for
He's
that.
been through a lot since then. He also had to stop in Dallas in between now and then where
He did.
Unceremonious.
Yeah.
Hey, before we get out of here, guys, East is not yet set. We assume that's going to be Cleveland going against Boston. Boston up 3-1. Game 5 coming up Wednesday night. Then it's a Friday, Sunday. That Western Conference Series finals will start on Monday. Let's talk about the West. What do you guys see happening in the West? I mean, I think a lot of people believe the Warriors are still the team to beat. Anybody change their mind after what they saw from the Rockets?
Not me. I'll take Golden State. I do think Houston will. I think it's going to be a fun series, good series. But Houston will need those guys to make a lot of shots. Golden State's guys are going to make their shots. They got 3 guys that are going to score no matter what you do. Houston's got guys that often do make their shots, but not always. And to me, that's going to be a problem if Houston, if Harden or Paul doesn't play great. Can Ariza and Gordon and those guys step into the void?
Yeah, well, I picked the Warriors. I think they're gonna win in 6. Kevin Durant's just hitting everything. Steph looks great. Their defense is looking strong again. The Rockets' better defense this year. Offense has been great. Still wondering what we're gonna see from James Harden. He's had some up and down moments in these playoffs. He's been at his brilliant best. Last game he was a little bit under the weather, wasn't as great. Chris Paul took the load. What are you going to get from Eric Gordon? It's going to be interesting to see, but I think the Warriors are going to still have more.
You got him in 6, Brett?
Warriors in 6.
Same thing, Warriors in 6. Here's the interesting thing about watching them against New Orleans. The weird thing about Kevin Durant going to that team is that both the Warriors are a little less fun to watch than they were before Kevin. And Kevin, you sort of forget what a great player he is sometimes because they have so many good players and they blend in. But what you see every now and then when they get pushed is Durant is still probably the second best player in the league, and what he's capable of doing when he has to. He did it in New Orleans in Game 4, and then you see all the talent around him, the way they can maximize all the pieces that they have. I think Houston is so much better than they've been, and the biggest change is what they've done defensively. What they did to go to Utah and win twice comfortably, including one, just an utter blowout, and one pretty comfortable win in Utah when that series was 1-1. That's legit. That's what a title contender does. And I do think Houston's a great team. I just think they're the second best team in the field.
Warriors in 6, Barry?
To change it up, I'll go Warriors in 5.
Okay. All right. And by the way, the Rockets won 2 of 3 against the Warriors this year, guys. I know the first one was the first game of the season, but interesting that they did go to Golden State and win.
Thunder won 3 out of 4 against the Jazz.
I'm not picking the Rockets to win. I'm just throwing it out there as a point to chew on. All right, that's it for Thunder Thursday. Be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.